So for our second reaction video, we had to watch a longer video on white-collar crime. The main speaker who was being interviewed during the video, his name was Eugene. He was a former accounting PhD student and an MBA at Harvard. When he was in school, he took on an interest in financial crimes after watching a, like he said, MSNBC show about like normal crime, and then just since he was in the financial field, he wondered like how it could be if the show was about financial criminals instead. So he started by sending questions to like financial criminals that were in prison, and he actually got responses from a few of them, which further increased his interest in the topic. And he said that like we often think about crime from the victim's perspective and not the perpetrator's perspective, which I think is true, because usually whenever you hear about a crime committed, you'll feel sorry for the victim, and you'll look at it through their eyes and be like, oh, what if this was me or somebody I knew? But you won't think about the other side of that and look at it through the perpetrator. He goes on to say that in white-collar crime, the people are usually not trying to harm anyone, which is not the case in like normal criminal activity. And they don't feel like it's like they're doing a bad thing at the time. They're just like looking out for their own interests and not taking into account the consequences of what they're doing. He goes on to talk about how white-collar crime never used to be prosecuted. It's like people never investigated businesses and looked into financial fraud and criminal activity going on, because there was like no moral outrage in society. Nobody really brought this up or brought it to the attention that all this stuff was bad and that you shouldn't do it, so it was never really looked into. There was a quote that he brought up from a defense lawyer, from like a former financial criminal, that he said that jail was no place for like an executive, because you don't lock up an executive with pimps and prostitutes, which will kind of show an overview of what used to be thought about on the topic, that financial criminals weren't seen to be as, I guess, bad as other types of normal crime. He goes on to talk about Gary Becker's theory of crime, which is like a rational act by the person who commits the crime. They think that they're not doing a bad thing at the time, and that people behave in a way people will behave in a way that will benefit themselves, or they'll perceive it to benefit themselves. So even if they're not right, they believe that it will benefit themselves, which is the main reason that people do anything. It's because it has some sort of benefit to themselves. He also talked about how like the financial criminals' actions don't fit into the cost-benefit model. So if you like look at past financial criminals, what they did, they don't fit into the cost-benefit model of like looking at what this could cost me and then weighing the benefits of what it could gain them, because the costs would far outweigh the benefits, because a lot of financial crime is caught relatively quickly and it's, I guess, pretty easy for the FBI to figure it out. They don't really fit into the model of saying, well, this could be really like more harmful to me than it would be good, because they're already in such a great position of what they are, in like a high-ranking business official, to get into a position to be able to even carry out these crimes, that they're not even like thinking about how negatively it could affect them. It would far outweigh the potential benefits of all these schemes. He went on to talk about how most regulatory changes have made the punishment greater to increase the cost. So like new laws have been put in place to increase, and he brought up it would like increase prison time from like say 5 years to 15 years, because they think if they increase the cost, then these people will no longer commit these crimes, because they'll weigh the costs and benefits and see that the cost is even higher now. But he then explains that doesn't really make sense, because they're already not looking at the cost-benefit model in the first place. So increasing the sentences to like have the cost greater isn't going to be an effective strategy. Says that perps aren't thinking and about the cost benefits, and they can't really justify their actions, because again, they're not really thinking about the cost benefit model, and when asked about it after they commit their crimes, they can't really justify what they did, and they can't really explain their reasoning of why they chose to do that. He then goes on to talk about how financial criminals don't feel as much remorse because the harm feels far away. It's like in normal crime, when you go to like, say you're like robbing a bank, the harm is right there in front of you. You're seeing that you're frightening these people and stealing the money. But in a financial like criminal, like a Ponzi scheme or money laundering or any of that kind of stuff, you can't directly see who you're affecting by your actions, so it makes you feel like it's not as bad of a thing to do. He goes on to explain that they're not aware of the pain they're causing, again, because they can't directly see that all the problems they're causing and lying in their like financial documents is actually hurting a lot of other people in many ways. He says that lying on paper is a lot easier than face-to-face, because you just got to change a few numbers and exaggerate your statements. But then sometimes when they're questioned about it face-to-face, they'll break down and admit to it that, yeah, they lied on their financial documents. He then goes on to talk about insider trading and the two types of psychopathy, which are a lack of empathy or remorse, or like antisocial behavior. And the one he says financial criminals exhibit the most is a lack of empathy or remorse, because, again, as he stated earlier, since they can't see the actual consequences of their crime, it's a lot easier to lack the remorse for doing it. He ends by like kind of saying telling people how they can, I guess, kind of avoid financial crimes, because I guess they're kind of easy to fall into as he explains that when people like move higher up in their position in their job, they lose their humility, and it's easier for them to fall into this like to fall into the, like, maybe if I could have more and I don't care about hurting others, I could always do better, and then they go and do or commit these financial crimes. So he said we can solve this by identifying our weaknesses ahead of time and like preparing to know what we're weaker in, so we can have others, I guess, kind of help like to keep us on track.